Hi, Lindsay.
Hi,
Um,
Parmesh.
you interviewed me 20 or something years ago for Rediff, and I'm so happy after more than 2 decades to be having this conversation with you. It's like life comes back
I know
in
I've
concert.
I've been excited as well. The last time we spoke, it feels as if we were both young, and I mean, well, you still look young. You still pull that off. But it does
These are
feel
gray hair. These are gray
it
hair.
does feel
Yeah,
it does feel great to sort of be able to
and
do this at
you're
least for
still
some time.
as you're still as hot and as grouchy as ever. So
Still grouchy. That's not. I'm not. I'm saying nothing about the hot bit. Everyone disagrees, but the grouchy bit. I mean, there's a friend of mine who, when I was young in college, used to say, you ooze malice, and that hasn't changed at all. I think. So I like to hold on to that.
And you actually gave an interview to Man's World recently saying that, having people walk away in grief and anger, wasting money they could have used on a pizza to buy this book would be your you would be very satisfied. So
I
the
I don't
diabolic nature continues.
I don't recall that, but it sounds like something I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you. Loved, absolutely loved every page and every word of the book. And you've done so much work on Indian writing in English, but there's this particular Bombay writing in in English, and this particular Bombaya zeitgeist that you kind of bring. And Anjali has done the blurb for your book, so that kind of writing. But while reading it, I was thinking Arun Kolatkar is so much present. Adil Jusawala is so present in different ways. And within this realm of Indian of Bombaya writing, I mean this new genre now of not just the great Bombay novel, but the great Bombay Catholic novel or the Catholic story, right? And I'm thinking, of course, of Jane's Bombay Balchao, which I can read both simultaneously, right? As companion pieces almost in that sense. Of course, Jane is a little more hopeful. Um, and also Jerry's in the Big Home, and further back Kiran Nagarkar's Ravan and Eddie. So there is a particular I think genre of Bombay, Catholic writing or like this community writing. And while writing it, did you think that you were contributing to this larger canvas specifically, or were you just writing these stories that you needed to write? I just want to know about how you place your work while writing.
I thought about why I wanted to write at all. Did I want to write a novel because it was something that um, everyone assumed I was meant to do at some point? The minute you write for a very long period of time, everyone does assume that at some point you're going to sit down and get serious and write a novel. It's a thing to do.
Yeah,
Or did I have something very specific to say? I had no interest in the canvas. I knew it was a Bombay novel, obviously, because I was born and raised in Bombay. It was an inescapable part of anything I would do. So I
yeah,
was quite clear about that. But I was concerned mainly about trying to tell a story because I thought that there was a part of that community that wasn't adequately reflected in the writing that I grew up reading. When we grew up looking at Indian writing in English, a lot of how literature has evolved in India changed radically the minute a lot of
yeah,
Indians moved to the West and started, their books were
yeah,
marketed better, and
yeah,
and the idea of what is an Indian novel started to evolve.
yeah,
But none of these evolved novels that started to then sell in large numbers and influence a whole generation of people reflected the smaller communities that are also an important part of not just Bombay but India as well. And
yeah,
there were two interesting responses I got to the book. One was a journalist who said, "I feel seen for the first time," which is a very
yeah,
powerful thing to say. Why would you feel seen for the first time in a fictional environment? And the other interesting comment was from someone from North India who said, "I didn't know people like this existed in India." And this is 2021, and that was a matter of concern. But the
yeah,
minute people give you these responses, it answers a question for yourself. And that's when I realized I probably wrote it because I was looking at responses like these. I wasn't looking at a canvas. I had stories I wanted to tell, and I found that the stories I wanted to tell weren't adequately reflected in the literature that I was confronted with, the literature that I grew up with. I just wanted to fill that need, fill that gap for myself.
yeah. And that voice, that specific voice, right? The way the way you write, I think even these voices are not, because when you look at, say, that first wave, right? When you look at, say, Rohingya Mystery, or I mean, but Salman Rushdie does it in a particular, Hindi, English, what he calls Hagmi, that kind of dialect. But it's still, in that sense, it's that, the authenticity with which your characters speak almost. I mean, I was thinking very much of Juno Diaz, and the way, Juno's characters just take you into this world with their language, and you have to get it. You have to get into the rhythm of it. And it's so interesting that it resonated, and that I was with, say, non-Bombay, because I could kind of hear the cadences when people are like, "What man?" This, when people speak, because one has grown up, with friends in this context. But it's interesting to hear that it's resonating with people across India. I wonder how they hear it, how they read it, and have you got any response in terms of from people across the world as to, are they able to hear? I mean, be seen is one thing, but are they able to hear these characters in the way you intended?
I don't know about the world because I don't. It hasn't been published outside the subcontinent
Yeah,
yet.
yeah,
It'll probably happen at some point in the future. But across, on the basis of responses that I have received, I think it has been fairly surprisingly, well received. I expected the opposite. I thought it
yeah,
would put off a number of people, because it is so local, it is so
yeah,
of its time and place that I thought it would put off people who aren't
yeah,
willing to. It doesn't require the reader to do a bit of work as well. If you
yeah,
are from Bombay, there's a part of you that is already halfway there. You're doing half the heavy lifting for me. But someone who isn't from Bombay, someone who isn't familiar with the way these people speak, it can
yeah,
be a bit disconcerting. It can also tip over into cliche very quickly, which was always a fear that I had while writing it. The
yeah,
minute you have so many dialects, and you look
yeah,
loaned words and things like that,
yeah.
there was always a risk of things tipping over. So, keeping all that in mind, I'm quite happy with the way people have reacted to it so far. No one's abused me yet. No one said anything nasty, which is a surprise, given.
That can't make you happy. If no one's abused you, how could you be happy?
Let's
Oh my
hope
God.
not.
Everyone watching this, Lindsay has probably smiled for the first time in 10 years now. So,
Yes,
that could
yes.
happen.
I am pleasantly surprised. I think it's just another sign of, I grow old, I grow old. But yeah, it hasn't been upsetting.
So, I wanted to ask you about, you said cliche, right? And I think I love how you play with cliche and kind of turn it around its head. And, your tone of writing is, uh, I mean, to me, it was this incredible hyphenation between cliche, pathos, and like biting humor that you're always grappling with, right? So one of the Jude Sequeira chapters, for instance, it's like, I was reading, I was like, this is every Bollywood film about drunk Catholics ever, right? And so, there was all flashing before my eyes. Yet, you took what seemed to be a very cliche trope and you made it sublime, and you kind of elevated it with a backstory. The Gulf, in this case, and labor that goes to the Gulf and loses a job and comes back, and then the world is moved them by. And so, you kind of take this cliche and you make us kind of get it, right? And I think that's it's incredible how you do that. So you play with these cliches as well, and I mean, I've
It's
been very,
that that's a very perceptive comment because one of the things I wanted to do is I set this book primarily in the 70s, the late 70s. And if you think of the kind of uh, characters that we grew up with, Hindi cinema was pretty much the only massive cultural force at that point. All of the cliches, all of the typecasts for a number of Indian communities, the Parsis, the Punjabis, all of them come from this big screen.
yeah,
And I wanted to use those typecasts as my starting point and walk backwards, to try
yeah,
and put flesh and bone behind
yeah,
these typecasts. If you do have someone who's drunk on screen, and yes, that's a comic
yeah,
character for you, but
yeah,
there's also an enormous amount of sadness that leads to a character arriving at that stage. I wanted to walk backwards. So I took all of those cliches, I took all of those typecasts and said, let's put them all together, but let's walk backwards and look at how they've arrived at this place. So
Yeah.
in effect, a lot of these people in the book could very well find themselves as extras in a Hindi film of the 70s. But
Completely.
their backstories were what was compelling for me. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I had that in my mind. I wanted to just work with those typecasts and say, look, these are the characters we've been asked to accept all our lives. But these are
Yeah.
very these are complex. This is a vibrant community. They're very complex people, and we can't just
Yeah.
write off people. We can't write off entire communities
Yeah.
with the way we've been trained to do for so many years, and we continue to do
Yeah.
it. Right? As
Yeah.
Indians, it's a problem. It's a problem we continue to struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was thinking, right? This is what if Anthony Gonzalez went back home? And, would Anthony go back home to Arlem and say, yes, my name is Anthony Gonzalez, but here's my story, right? Or
Right.
Albert Pinto ko gussa kyun aata hai? Because there's a backstory.
Exactly.
So to me, it was, yeah, I really got that. I mean, you begin with Milton's Paradise Lost, and you kind of take us uh, on this journey. A lot of people have seen it as, I mean, as dark and bleak. Uh, I just see it as I mean, it's Bombay life. And I mean, I don't see it as like completely bleak. I mean, there are people, but the people who escape have happy endings. Gavin, for example.
That's right.
Uh, yeah, sorry.
To a large extent, I think because we managed to escape that, because we grew up, in that time before liberalization. A lot of people refused to try and look at what India was like back then, because we've
Yeah,
forgotten a lot of it. It's now part of rosy, you know, pictures of the past. But there was a lot of darkness, a lot of it that
yeah,
we've conveniently ignored. We grew up, we remember the riots in Bombay, for instance, when we were
yeah,
teenagers. A lot of these things that, with the benefit of hindsight, now seem like, a golden age of promise, because we were young and the world was our oyster and things like that. But there was a lot of darkness. And I think to gloss over that does a disservice to people who grew up in that time. So I assume some people feel as if the book is bleak and without hope. But the fact is, for a lot of people back then, and for a lot of people in Bombay and across India today, life is bleak and still unremittingly without hope. And the pandemic has pretty much showed that side of the country to a lot of us. It isn't the story of our India where we sit and talk about
yeah,
books on Zoom
yeah,
meetings.
yeah,
There's a whole other India
yeah.
where people simply haven't been able to eat all day, and that's always on my
Um,
mind.
I want to talk a little bit about the efficiency with which you're able to create and contain worlds. I was like blown away. Like Ricardo in room 106, right? It's 1.5 pages. It's like, oh my God. But in 1.5 pages, you've given us, a tight, complex, ridiculously rich world. How do you do it? I mean, do you labor? Do you craft? I mean, how do you get to saying so much in so little?
I think it takes a lot of time. I edit and then I re-edit and then I go away and then I come back and I edit again. And one of the biggest problems I've had as an editor, as a writer over the past 20, 25 odd years is, how do you say the most and using the least possible number of words? It's very hard to do. And if I
Yeah,
were to write this novel 10 years ago, it would be a longer novel, because I'd take a much longer, more meandering way to get to the point.
yeah,
I just wanted to
yeah,
get to the point. Look, this is what I'm trying to say. This is the emotion I'm trying to capture. So it's basically just down to editing. You start with 10,000 words and you try and reduce it to 150, and it takes a serious amount of rewriting and editing to get to that place. I probably wouldn't have been able to do it 10 years ago, if I'm being brutally honest with
very
myself.
interesting. I want to
Is
talk
that
about
also?
room 106. because to me that seems to kind of be the star of, of the novel. And I couldn't help thinking it adds up to seven, but which is supposed to be a lucky number, but 106 is far from. So tell us about 106 and the idea of luck and being cursed, and whether you believe in any of these and how this kind of influenced the stories.
So everyone who lives in this mansion, right, doesn't have a way out. They're
Yeah,
trapped. Right?
yeah,
There is no light at the end of the tunnel. The only people who do have a light at the end of the tunnel are the people who live in 106 because they're temporary residents. Right? I wanted to give everyone else a chance to redeem themselves. You're awful human beings, but here's someone who's worse off than you, who's here for a very short period of time. Can you show them the kind of empathy and kindness that you believe the world ought to have shown you? And they always fail to do it, right? They reject
yeah,
it every single time. And I wanted to use that to act as a mirror. I wanted 106 to act as a kind of mirror to everyone else living in that mansion, and show them just how awful they were as human beings. And I suppose it's incorrect to say that they're awful, because when you're poor, you don't really have the luxury to empathize with people who are as
yeah,
poor as you are. And I say that
yeah,
from personal experience. When I wasn't well off, I just didn't have the wherewithal to be able to empathize with people I was interacting with. It's only with the luxury of time and space and money that you can suddenly start to come across as a more empathetic human being, when you can sit back and ask someone how they are and really mean it. Because back then I would have asked someone how they were and wouldn't mean it at all. And that's just how it was. When you're poor, and when you're broke, and when you're depressed, empathy is a luxury. So I wanted that aspect to come across as well. All of these people were poor and depressed, and they really had nothing going on for them. And the people who come to 106 offer them a chance of redemption. Can you show us kindness, the kindness that you've not been shown? But they never show it. And that was an important point that I wanted to make in a fairly subtle manner. It also allowed me to bring in, you know, a bunch of really colorful people, with no real backstories, to just occupy that space for a short period of time. And the room also represents that. It's a short period of time, a short rental, and really short stories. They come in, they go out, and it's a bit like a little bit of fairy dust that's just being sprinkled there. That's what I wanted to.
I want to talk about your column writing and journalism. You spoke earlier about how much you labor to work on, your fiction, and how you work on this condensation. How does this rigor of doing your Rediff work was incredible, which of course now can't be found online. But your midday columns, right? The wide range of issues that you cover in the midday column, and your journalism at large. If you can talk about that relationship, about how both inform each other.
I don't think of myself as a journalist anymore, to be honest. I quit full-time journalism almost a decade and a half ago. And I quit ironically because of Rediff. I lost interest in journalism because of Rediff.
Yeah.
And I write the column because the Midday asked me to. I really like the Midday. It's a Bombay newspaper. It's a newspaper I grew up with. I write it because I'm sentimental about the
Yeah.
fact that that paper exists. Especially now that it's the only tabloid in the city. It's extremely important for me to do that. So I will say that being a journalist does inform everything you do anyway at some point or the other, whether you like it or not. And it's not the writing as much that has influenced me, but being a copy editor, being a sub editor, and being an editor. I think those are the things that made a huge difference to the way I approached fiction. I didn't set out to be a writer of fiction. I set out to be a journalist when I graduated, and I was looking at the real world and looking at real people. But when did eventually turn towards fiction, everything I learned as an editor made a much more profound impact on my writing than working as a journalist did.
I want to talk a little bit about this prize. If you win, what does it mean? What are you going to do with it? What are you working on now? What can be now? We are Lindsay Pereira fans. There's a
Is
there's
that
a
too much?
well, of course, and you have now a fandom. What can we expect? if you win this prize, post prize, give us a taste of what's coming up. Yeah.
Well, the fandom is a complete. Again, it's a bit of a surprise. Three people reading the book is not a fandom, despite your relentless optimism. But the thing about the prize is, I honestly haven't thought about winning. I'm surprised that it made it to the short list. I didn't expect it to make it to the long list. I didn't expect people to read the book. I didn't expect it to find an audience. When I was asking people to look at it, does this book merit publication? It wasn't as if people jumped and said, "Oh, we really need to publish this." It was a long road. There were people at Penguin who did a lot of the heavy lifting. I just wrote the book, but it was my agent Kanishka Gupta picked it up, and Elizabeth Kuruvilla at Penguin championed it from day one and continues to champion it more than my mother and my relatives do. And Saloni
Your
Mittal
mother
was
didn't like it much, no? Your mother didn't like it.
I'm going to come to that in a minute. And Saloni Mittal was the copy editor, and she did a great job. And Prateek Agarwal, who does marketing, Alawat Gunjan, who did the cover of the book. So it really took a village to get this book noticed to begin with. So winning it really was the furthest, and still is the furthest from my mind. But if I do win, it's primarily just to tell my mother that, look, there was something about this book that warranted attention, because she was upset. She still hasn't read the book. She read bits of it, or maybe she's read it and she's lying about it, which is possible. But she read a bit of it, and she said that it made her really upset. It took me a long time to try and figure out why she said that. I tried to look at it from her perspective.
Yeah.
And what she believed is that when we talk about community, or where we talk about religion, or where we talk about belief systems, right, these things are personal and should not be talked about. And for a writer, the exact opposite is true. It's because we don't talk about a lot of things that we find ourselves in situations that we shouldn't really be in. The fact that we're dealing with this enormous amount of hypocrisy, a massive amount of repression and regression across the country. We're moving backwards in 2021. We're refusing to allow people access to rights. We're refusing to give women rights. We're refusing to deal with the caste system. We're refusing to accept that homosexuality is perfectly acceptable. These are serious issues that any country that wants to call itself a developing country is refusing to sort of confront. And it stems from the fact that people like my mother find it too upsetting to dig around in the dirt and ask some really tough questions. So if I win, I'm going to tell my mother, look, someone somewhere thought it was worth reading. So maybe you should just read it. And I'm not going to share that prize money with her.
Good. I hope it wins for exactly this reason.
Because spite is important. We all need spite in our life. I revel like on spite. Whether it's my mother or I think that comes through in the book as well. There's a lot of spite there. So I'm not going to share that prize money with my mother at all.
I hope it wins for that reason, and I hope we get to see that as an acceptance speech as well. Say, Mom, this is for you, but this is not for you.
But it's not for you. Yeah, I like that.
What are you working on now? What do we look forward to? It's hard to do a second book after something like this.
I don't know. I mean, I wrote a second book. I finished it last year. I chose not to send it out, because when you have one book out, right, and 6 months later, the idea of no one's interested, honestly, in reading another book by me or by anyone else. The people struggling with all kinds of things. If I do decide to send this out to a publisher, it will probably happen next year, which means that it probably will get published, if at all, if someone deems it worthy of publication, maybe 2 years down the line. But at this point, it's really not. It's not important. It's just something I wrote last year. I like it. I don't know if it will ever be published. We all like to think that we've written a second book. It's probably an amazing book, and I'm more pessimistic. It's probably the worst book ever. It's probably god awful. And if it doesn't get published, I'm honestly okay with it. I was shortlisted. It's great. Life is good. Honestly, it doesn't bother me as much as it should.
You want to give us a taste of what's in it, just a little bit? Just a
The
little
book
bit.
is it's a retelling of the Ramayana. Actually, it's set in
Wow.
Bombay again, because I can't seem to get Bombay out of my mind. It's set in Bombay. It's It's set in Parel this time. It chose not to
Yeah.
focus on the Roman Catholic community.
Yeah.
If only to silence one or two critics who would then say that I can't do anything apart from writing about this community I grew up in. So there's
Yeah.
nothing. There isn't a Roman Catholic in the book at all on purpose. I made sure that there wasn't a Roman Catholic in the book. But it is a retelling of the Ramayana. It's set in Parel and it's set in Bombay during the riots. So again, I don't know if it's readable or if it's the worst thing ever written. But we'll see. If someone does think of it as interesting enough, then maybe in 2 years, it should be out. I don't know. It's too soon. I haven't sent it to anyone yet.
It sounds super exciting. I hope you do send it, and I hope we do get to
I'll
read.
send it to you if you're interested. I'll
Yeah,
send it to you.
please,
But then
please.
I'll hold
I
you to
would.
it, and I'll call you every weekend to make sure you read it. So be
Well,
careful
I
what you
read
wish.
very fast.
Careful what you wish for.
Yep, yep. After reading Gods and Men, so for sure, be very careful to wish for. Lindsay, thank you so much for this conversation, and it was incredible reconnecting with you in this chat, but also through the book. Thank you so much for all that you do, and for your
But
incredible writing.
no, thank you for the careful reading. The fact that you did all of the research, your questions, the fact that you Googled me and spent time with my columns, and the fact that I thought it was really moving. The fact that you took the time to do that. It was a very careful reading of the book. Your questions were careful questions. I appreciate that enormously, and I also appreciate you taking the time on a Saturday morning to talk about an extremely depressing, bleak book. I appreciate that more than you will know. So thank you very much, Parmesh.
Mwah. Lots and lots of love.
Bye.